Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. Again, I apologize about my voice, a little under the weather. So today I want to do another episode for Christian Zionists, right? And I want to talk about how Israel was formed under because due to terrorism, right? And I think that's an interesting thing if you're a Christian Zionist that you might be against, right? Another thing I want to do, and I talked about it before, is I want to do an episode that covers how many Israeli prime ministers were war criminals before they became prime minister. So like not a lot of American presidents were war criminals before they became president. Look at Bill Clinton. He was the governor of Arkansas. He became president, committed war crimes as president, but not before. So this is just kind of interesting, right? And in this one, we're going to scoop up Menachem Begin, and we're going to get him in there. We already got Yitzhak Rabin in the previous one. Netanyahu's easy. Rabin a second term. Netanyahu a second term. We're just clocking them out here, right? And so this is going to be this video will be referenced later in that episode. And I can't promise that all of them were war criminals beforehand, as I'm just gathering the evidence, but this is getting Menachem Begin, one more of the prime ministers. So basically what happened is 1945, World War II ends, okay? In 1947, there's going to be the UN partition plan of Palestine, which is going to give the unfair allotment of land to Jews and Palestinians. That's going to cause the Palestinian Civil War, and then that's going to be immediately preceded in 48, and then it finished in 49 of the Arab-Israeli War, the first one, and then that's how Israel's going to secure their territory. But this situation happens in 1946, 1 year after World War II ended, 1 year before the UN partition plan, right? So at this point, it's still the British mandate. So the British are in political control of Palestine at the time, right? And so the Jews had gotten so out of control that they would just run around and do pogroms on the Palestinians, and were trying to escalate, we'll say. So the British decided to step in on June 29, 1946, and they started Operation Agatha, right? We talked about this before. This is also called Black Saturday or Black Sabbath. And they basically raided the Jewish Agency, which was the organization that was doing a lot of the things for the Jews in Palestine. And they seized a bunch of documents. They seized armed caches across different places in the country, arrested 2,700 people. Some people say 2,500. One of the people arrested was a future Prime Minister, Moshe Sharett, but that's not involving him in a war crime. We're not going to be able to get him in this episode in a war crime. I don't even know who that guy is, but I'll bet you I'm going to do a future episode and he's going to be a war criminal before he became prime minister. I'm not 100% sure. I'm just guessing. So the number of British soldiers that participated in Operation Agatha, some say 10,000, 17,000, or 25,000 security forces. So it's unclear, right? And so basically I got two articles here that what I'm giving you is just really mainstream stuff, right? So I'm using a Haaretz article. If you don't know about them, that's a very mainstream accepted publication in Israel. It's not far right, not far left. And if an event has happened long enough ago, they'll tell you something pretty close to the truth. The other reference I have below is from the Jewish Virtual Library, which is a pro-Jewish website that does a lot of documents about Jewish people. And so I'm not using some extremist stuff to show you this, okay? So I'm going to pop some slides up on the screen, and we're going to talk about what happened, okay? So keep in mind, there's all these different military groups from the Israelis. One of them is the Haganah, and they're not the Israelis, they're the Jewish people at this time, or the people who call themselves Jewish people, whatever. And basically, the Haganah, we've talked about them before. They're going to take a notorious part in the Nakba and do all types of war crimes later, right? And so there's that group, and then there's there's two more militant groups. One is called Lehi, I believe, and the other one's called Irgun. So basically this terrorist attack is on the King David Hotel is going to be taking place by the Irgun, right? And so basically, the Haganah leadership was under the impression, mistaken it turned out, that the files taken from the Jewish Agency had been taken to the King David Hotel, where both the British civilian government and its military leadership in Palestine were headquartered. Now, basically, the files that they took from the Jewish Agency told about all of their nefarious plans in the region. And so they really had to get rid of these documents before they were assessed by the British, right? So a week later, news of a massacre of 40 Jews and a pogrom in Kielce, Poland, reminded the Jews of Palestine how Britain's restrictive immigration policy had condemned thousands to death. So this was in the Jewish Virtual Library article, and it was interesting that they put this in there because it was pushing the motivation for why the Jews in Palestine felt like they had to act. Now, I looked up this actual pogrom, and it was basically there were reports that somebody had a Jewish person in their community had kidnapped and killed a kid to use for their blood magic. And though they have a religion of blood magic, they purport that they did not do that. And so then lots of Jews were just taken out and put to death by the local population, not anything nefarious by the government. Okay, so the proposal to blow up the hotel, specifically its southern section, came from Menachem Begin, later Israel's prime minister, but then head of the Irgun Zvi Leumi, national military organization, also known by its Hebrew acronym Etzel. Okay, yeah, that was it. I said something different before. Irgun is also Etzel. But approval of the operation came from top officials of the Haganah, Moshe Shnei, the chief of general headquarters, and Yitzhak Sadeh, commander of the Palmach, the militia's elite commando unit. Okay? So Menachem Begin is the one who planned this, right? And then later on, he's going to institute it as well. So Begin, however, is the one who insisted that a warning be given before the blast so that the hotel could be evacuated, although there was concern within the Haganah that too much warning might allow the British to remove the incriminating documents the attack was intended to destroy. So when you're talking about whether this part's true or not that I just read you, we're taking it from Menachem Begin's book. So he's a war criminal. He's going to do a terrorist attack. He says in his book, right? He's the source. And he says, I was trying not to kill too many civilians or even too many people. But they're admitting that the documents that they're trying to destroy are incriminating to them. So no matter what, it's a criminal enterprise. Okay. And then basically at the last minute, the Haganah and the Irgun also argued over the exact timing of the blast. At that point, Begin decided to go ahead with the operation unilaterally. So the two groups were arguing, and then Begin of the Irgun says, let's just do this. So then he takes full responsibility for it. Like if he was at a war crimes trial, he would definitely be a war criminal, we'll say, right? So now let's talk about this supposed warning that they gave, which may or may not have been. I'm just going to give you the facts and you make your own assessment, okay? Here's from the article. There's no doubt that Irgun gave a warning of the impending explosion, but it's also clear that the warning did not reach anyone, quote, in an official position with any power to take action, end quote, as a British inquiry later concluded. Okay, so the article's claiming that the British said that they definitely gave a warning, but it didn't get to anybody official. They're going to say later that's not true. An initial call to a hotel switchboard about 15 minutes before the blast was ignored. 10 minutes later, the French consulate on the hotel's northern side received a call alerting it to open its windows so as to reduce damage from the impending blast. Calling them to tell them to open their windows is not like an actual warning. Okay. Oddly, the warning that finally elicited a reaction within the hotel came to it by way of the Palestinian Post, predecessor to today's Jerusalem Post, which received a call at 12:32 p.m. The paper's operator passed on the message to both the hotel and the police. So this is at 12:32 p.m. The bomb's going to go off at 12:37 p.m. So letting them know that the bomb is there and having a bunch of people run into the room where the bomb's going to explode just kills more people, right, at this point. British guards rushed to the hotel's basement, where they found 6 milk cans holding a total of 350 kilograms of explosives, but it was too late for significant action as the timer detonated the bombs at 12:37. Wow, your warning lured them down to the basement. Good job. So they're really trying to save lives here, right? As a result, when the bombs exploded, the casualty toll was high, a total of 91 killed and 45 injured. Among the casualties were 15 Jews. Few people in the hotel proper were injured by the blast. Rescue and salvage workers took 3 days to comb through the wreckage, and 2,000 truckloads of rubble needed to be removed from the site. In contrast to Arab attacks against Jews, which were widely hailed as heroic actions, the Jewish National Council denounced the bombing of King David. Okay, so that right there, that little first part of this blurb, they're trying to say how virtuous Jews are. Okay, there's a pro-Jewish article, and they're trying to say how virtuous Jews are, because when the Arabs do attack against Jews, they're hailed as heroic actions, but the noble Jewish National Council denounced the bombing of the King David, right? For decades, the British denied they had been warned. In 1979, however, a member of the British Parliament introduced evidence that the Irgun had indeed issued the warning. He offered the testimony of a British officer who heard other officers in the King David Hotel bar joking about a Zionist threat to the headquarters. The officer who overheard the conversation immediately left the hotel and survived. Okay. So that's not very clear evidence, but I don't really care if they warned him or not, right? I'll put the picture up on the screen of what the hotel looked like. Obviously it was a mass casualty event, and basically, so if you let's look at Menachem Begin's guilt, right? He was the one who planned it, and then he plotted on it, but then he took over the plot himself and unilaterally ordered it. So we're going to put him under a Israeli prime minister who was a war criminal before he became Israeli prime minister. He's probably done a lot of other terrible things than that, right? But we're gonna say fact check true on that, right? And if you're looking at wanting to support Israel and you're like, you know what I mean? Maybe they only did this one act of terrorism. Let me tell you a short story, right? That happens right after this. So basically, in this period between 45 and 49, they basically, and even right after, they have a demographic war, right? So they've done Al Nakba and they've gotten rid of 750,000 Palestinians by deporting them. They're fleeing to Jordan. They're trapping them in Gaza. They're not counting the ones in Gaza against the overall population. But basically, demographically, they've got to be massively higher, than the Arab population. And so basically what happens is the Jewish, the Mossad or whoever the precursor of the Mossad is, they go to like Iraq and countries like that, right? And they start threatening Jews. And then they start doing terrorist attacks and bombing their synagogues, false flagging them, pretending like they're Muslims who hate Jews. So that the Jews will then, their own people, because this is the Mossad or the precursor of the Mossad, will then, oy vey, right? They have to flee to Israel, their only place of safety, the last defense in the world, in order to boost their demographic population, right? But still, it's terrorism. It's just terrorism. And terrorism against your own people, is worse than this story that I just told you, where you're doing terrorism against a foreign group that's ruling over you, even though it's not your land. It's the Palestinians' land at the time. Anyways, I just thought this story was interesting. If you want to follow it up, I'll put the Al Nakba one in the description and talk about what happened after this. But basically, the result of this bombing of the King David Hotel was that the British decided, just like the Romans had decided in 70 AD, that these wild people in the desert are ungovernable, right? And then that's why after I forget what the name of the revolt was in 70 AD, and then they just decided to just disperse the people and say, you just can't live here anymore. And so the British were out too, and they were like, man, we got to get away from this situation. So that hastened their turning it over to the fledgling United Nations, which was just being formed and had very few countries in it at that time, which led to the horrible UN partition that's going to happen in 47. Anyways, I think it's an important link in the story. I think it's important to understand. It's another argument you could use against Christian Zionists. Christian Zionists are the number one threat to the United States of America having our own sovereignty. See, this is what I want. I just want sovereignty. I want the people of the country to have a say in the control of the country. We do not, because a group of people in our country they just sit by and allow control of a foreign country over our Congress. And that's not okay. And if we could get past Christian Zionism, I almost said Christian nationalism, Christian Zionism, then that would be okay. Let me tell you a brief story about Christian nationalism, which is hilarious, right? I had seen these memes on there that they were like, they got this flag, this Christian nationalist flag. It's got like a red cross and then it's got like a blue corner, and I was moving into this new house that I'm in now, and there's only one neighbor, and I drive past the neighbor's house. I'm like, oh, they got a Christian nationalist flag, right? They're probably pretty cool, and but I didn't say anything. And then later on, I seen the flag and I told my wife, like, oh, look, they're Christian nationalists. And she's like, I don't think that's what that is, And then basically it turns out that all of those posts where they were saying this flag was Christian nationalist flag is like absolute nonsense, because it's like the Baptist conference flag or something like that, and they're just Baptists, not even Christian nationalists, or maybe they are or whatever, but that's not represented by the flag. And so I thought that was just a silly story of propaganda that you see. And if you're not near anybody who's in the Baptist conference or whatever the particular one is for this flag, I thought that was pretty interesting. Anyways, tomorrow I'm going to talk about another story that you could use it with Christian Zionists, and that is just people in Israel just spitting on the Christians, spitting at their churches. All of this. This is an ancient ancient Jewish custom. They're going to say, right? We're going to hear that from Ben Gvir. We're going to hear it from settlers. I think it's a pretty interesting story. Hope to see you then.